Today I'd like to talk about fairy tales, or at least versions of characters from fairy tales. Maybe they live in our world, and it was a series from like 2011 to 2018. Of course, you've seen the title, so you know I'm talking about Once Upon a Time, but I always have to do that kind of intro. But I've always been fascinated with the idea of mythological or fairy tales, basically fictional characters that we know of having mystical powers or whatever, living in our world, having to hide that away, or sometimes in certain versions of stories where people are just too dense and they don't realise. They see magic all around them but don't pay attention to it. I do like those interpretations a little more. Maybe I just doubt humanity. But Once Upon a Time has that. It's got that subversion, the idea that these are the fairy tale characters you know and love from the old stories, or at least the Disneyfied versions of many of them. But there's a twist. I mean, the first season was none of them knew, well, aside from the one who made the curse that made that happen, and of course, Robert Carlyle as Rumpelstiltskin, who I'll get onto in a bit. But their revelation, the rest of the town, came through the introduction, or the reintroduction technically, because she was born in the other world and carried through, of Jennifer Morrison's character of Emma Swan, who is brought by her own son back into that world, who's been looked after by the evil queen. When you put this down on paper, it does sound a bit silly, and I realise that, but that idea of bringing this basically audience surrogate into the picture. We are Emma Swan in this. If you understand anything about film theory, which also goes into TV series, really, if you think about it, any visual medium tends to fall in similar tropes. But if you're familiar with film theory, the idea of an audience analogue is that they're learning about what's going on as we are. It means that you don't have to have big exposition dumps by characters who already know what's going on, because I hate that. There's a massive sort of disconnect with the world. If people who know how that world works are standing there going, well, we've got to go and do this because XYZ, it's very disingenuous. It doesn't feel real. So I love the fact that they didn't just, put Snow White there for argument's sake, and she's like, well, we've got to figure out our memories because I've mystically suddenly remembered, and now I've got to tell everyone who they are so I can introduce the characters to the audience as well. Knowing wink. We have someone else doing that role who happens to be Snow White's daughter, so it works in my analogy. And the fact that they ran with this idea throughout was great. Everything that these people took for granted and understood had to be explained to us, the audience, but it was explained to our stand-in, who I keep wanting to call Bella Swan, even though I hate Twilight. Just the name's interlinked to my brain. But there's so many great performances in this that even some of the hokier moments are acceptable because they really thought about who fit in the role. They really thought about who would be the best person to do this part. And I don't know about the casting process. They may have, had certain people in mind and they chased them, or there may have been extensive casting for every single role. I don't know. And frankly, I'm not that bothered because who we've got works. I don't care how they got there. But everyone was so well cast. And it's really weird. I'd seen Zootopia or Zootropolis, whatever you call it in your region, regional naming, but I'd already got this understanding of who Jennifer Goodwin was through her voice as Judy Hopps. So whenever I was looking at Snow, I was kind of seeing Judy. I was seeing like the features that they put on Judy. I'm like, wow, they made her look really like her. Now, anyone who's seen the series first and then watched Zootopia may not think it looks a lot like her, but I've got that attachment between her voice and her appearance, which is really weird to say. But it's strange that I didn't get that with Jennifer Morrison, because I didn't see her as the character from How I Met Your Mother, which I'd seen first. But David, all of the characters, and yes, I mentioned briefly earlier, Robert Carlyle as Rumpelstiltskin really is the core of the show. A lot of people will probably think, oh no, it's Emma Swan's story. But it's as much, if not more, his story. Because he's framed as the villain in a lot of different tales. He's framed as part of so many different stories other than his own. And I love that fact. The fact that they subverted, because we all know these stories, like I say, the Disneyfied versions and otherwise. We all know these tales so intimately, we've grown up with them in some form. And the fact that they went, you know them, but do you know them really? Because now we're going to throw this element in. And now you're as much in the dark as anyone else. And I love that. And they did that, like I say, consistently with Rumpelstiltskin. The fact that he was the beast, to Belle, played by Emily de Ravin, and it so worked. Their relationship was beautiful. The fact that it was kind of untenable in a lot of ways as well, gave a lot of emotional weight to what he did. He could have been written poorly and by a different actor. He could have been just a caricature, a comic villain, just chewing the scenery constantly. And yeah, whenever he was in Rumpelstiltskin mode, he was allowed to let that side out. The crazy, chaotic being that is Rumpelstiltskin, and the portrayal by Robert Carlyle chewing the scenery was brilliant when he's in Rumpel mode. But when he's in Mr. Gold mode or Detective whatever mode, and I'll get more into that in a bit, it's a lot more of a nuanced performance, and that's brilliant. The fact that they got an actor who can do extremes and then really dial it down. Quiet rage as Rumpel doesn't work. Quiet rage as Mr. Gold really works. And I'd loved Robert Carlyle in a lot of things over the years, granted, but this really escalated my respect for him. But I love the fact that they wrapped it all up very nicely. We got the fairy tale ending, and what do you mean? Yeah, 7. Season 7. Didn't want to talk about that. It was an interesting idea. Taking it somewhere new entirely, setting a whole new parallel version, if you will, an alternate set of events that were very similar to the ones we knew, but not quite, was great as an idea. I just don't think the execution worked. For one season, it just didn't have enough time. I think if it had been the last 2 or 3 seasons, half the stuff we knew in Storybrooke, half Hyperion Heights, where they got time to sit with these characters to say, like, okay, you think you didn't know what was coming before when we subverted some of the tales you've known for years. Now we're going to subvert those subversions. If we'd have had a lot more time to sit with it and live with it, and a lot more of the cast would have stayed on, I think that would have helped. But we had a whole new group of people aside from 2 or 3, and we had guest spots by people we knew, but it just felt like kowtowing to the fact that they weren't getting the audience because people weren't invested, because they had to set up the world in half the season before they could actually get to the story they really wanted to tell. I'm not salty about this at all. One of the stand-up performances though was Alice and Tilly. That is one of the best characters in that last year. I barely remember many of the other new ones introduced, but she was beautiful, and her relationship as well was wonderfully handled. It wasn't like, look, it's a lesbian relationship. It was like, no, here's a relationship. It just happens to be between 2 women. And I love that. Her and young Robin was great. But that last season could have not, just not happened, and we wouldn't have been really at a big loss. And I hate saying that, especially as I say, there are a few standout moments and a few standout performances. But if you haven't gotten round to Once Upon a Time yet, I haven't spoiled too much, because it is one of those things that I think is worth watching. And if you haven't got around to it, you've just thought it's a bit silly, it's a bunch of Disney fairy tales, give it a watch. Like I say, it does subvert stuff. It leans a little towards the edgy when it can, but it does lean towards a saccharine sweet. And I think with what's going on in the world, it's still going on right now. I think we need a little bit of a breather, a little bit of fun. It's on Netflix, at least in the UK still, as far as I'm aware. I don't know about other regions, but VPNs exist. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, if you've not watched it, give it a go. It's fun, it's a good romp. If you've watched it when it first came out, give it another blast through now. You've got plenty of time to binge, probably. But that's all I want to say this time, so until next time, as always, thanks for watching, and take care. And remember, a dream is a wish your heart makes.